Hey there. Tonight we're heading back, not to warm castles or candlelit feasts, but to smoke-filled huts and frozen earth. This is winter in the Middle Ages, the real one. No glory, no armour. Just peasants doing their best to survive months of cold, hunger and silence. Snow drifted through the roof. Bread turned to stone. Wolves came closer. And every day you got up and did it all again. If slow, grounded history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there. So, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Wrap yourself in something warm. And let's begin in a season that didn't just test people, it tried to end them. You don't need a calendar to know when winter's coming. You feel it. In the bones first, they stiffen like yesterday's bread. Then in the sky, which goes from blue to a kind of reluctant grey. And finally in the animals, who start looking at you with quiet suspicion, as if they know something you don't. And they usually do. Autumn doesn't end. It retreats. Slowly. Leaves fall, sure. But it's not just that. It's the way the wind changes direction. It starts slipping through the gaps in the cottage, exploring the place like an uninvited guest, poking around, finding where the warmth lives and evicting it. The chickens grow quieter. The dog stops barking at the wind and begins listening to it instead. That's how you know it's nearly time. The sun, when it shows up at all, feels thin, as if it's forgotten how to be warm. And everyone walks just a bit faster, not because they're in a hurry, but because standing still hurts more now. There's no grand announcement, no snowstorm with a flourish. Winter arrives like debt, quietly and with a great deal of consequence. The first task, always, is denial. You pretend the cold is temporary, a chill, nothing more. You wear the same tunic you wore in October, but now with a cloak that's more whole than fabric. You tell yourself you'll mend it. You won't. Not because you're lazy, but because the needle's bent and the threads run out, and your fingers are too numb to hold either. We talk a lot about preparation, as if we were always ready. But let's be honest, most winters arrive when we're not quite finished with autumn. There's always a corner of the roof you meant to fix, or wood you meant to chop. Always something still left in the garden that didn't get dried or salted or stored in time. Still, you do what you can. You stuff straw between the gaps in the wall. You drape cloth over the doorway. You rearrange the beds so everyone sleeps a little closer to the hearth. Even Uncle Gawain, who smells like sheep and talks in his sleep about debts no one remembers. You don't light fires all day. That's a luxury. Wood is for evenings, for cooking, and for the hour or so when everyone pretends to be cheerful. The rest of the time, you rely on movement, layering, and the heat of several reluctant siblings pressed together under one scratchy blanket. The animals sense it too. They linger longer near the shelter. The chickens huddle. The pigs go quiet, which is deeply unsettling. The cows grow more irritable, which is to say, they remain exactly the same. Outside, the ground turns to iron. The paths that were muddy last week are now treacherous, half-frozen ruts that twist ankles and swallow boots. Water in the bucket develops a skin of ice. You break it each morning with a ladle, then curse softly as it numbs your hands. And the sky. The sky just hangs there, low, grey, expectant, like it's waiting for something. You squint at it as if you might read it, as if clouds carry messages. They don't, but they do mean you won't see the sun again for several weeks. In town, people walk faster. They speak in shorter sentences. Jokes dry up. No one's really in the mood. Even the church sermons get a little darker. The priest reminds you that cold weather is God's way of encouraging humility. You wonder if God might try a slightly warmer lesson plan. And then, finally, one morning, it happens. Snow. Not a blizzard, not yet. Just a dusting. Like flour spilled across the fields. But it changes everything. The thatch turns white. The trees stiffen. Your breath comes out in little clouds, and every step outside sounds like you're stepping on old parchment. And with that snow comes the realization you're locked in now. The earth has closed up shop for the season. No more digging, no more planting. Nothing will grow. What you've already stored is all you've got. And if you didn't store enough, well, you'll learn how thin stew can really get. You begin to count things differently. Not in days, but in bundles. How many bundles of firewood left? How many sacks of grain? How many turnips? How many eggs this week? Not many, as the hens stop laying when it's cold. They prefer to huddle near the fire, just like everyone else. You keep yourself busy, even if nothing feels productive. You mend clothes, you scrape pans, you stir ashes, hoping a warm coal is hiding underneath. If there's time, and there often is, you spin wool. It's not just for making cloth. It's for keeping your hands moving, your mind occupied. Too much quiet, and your thoughts start getting ideas. The animals aren't just company. They're cohabitants. The warmer ones are invited inside. Not all at once. There are boundaries after all, but enough to turn the house into a communal stew of smells, sounds, and shared body heat. You get used to waking up with a goat breathing on your neck. Well, maybe not used to, but you stop fighting it. Evenings are the worst. The sun disappears too early, and the darkness arrives like it's angry about something. Candles are expensive. Tallow lamps are smoky. You sit near the fire, if there's one going, and you listen. To stories. To wind. To the way the wood pops when it burns. Sometimes someone gets it in their head to tell a ghost story. This always seems like a good idea, until you realise you have to walk across the freezing yard to use the privy afterward. You run. You try not to trip. You definitely don't look into the shadows. And yet, winter isn't all misery. There's a rhythm to it. A kind of bitter predictability. You know the chores. You know the limits. And there's a strange camaraderie in knowing everyone else is miserable too. You learn to find comfort in small victories. Warm feet for 5 minutes. A stew that tastes slightly less like despair. A day without wind cutting through the cracks in the wall. You celebrate quietly, because the moment you laugh too loud, someone will remind you we've only just begun. Historically, we peasants didn't fare too well in winters. The little ice age, starting around the 14th century, brought harsher, longer winters across Europe. Rivers froze. Crops failed. In some years, the Rhine froze solid for months, and markets were held right on the ice. Yes, people shopped on frozen rivers, until the ice decided otherwise. In particularly bad years, like 1315 to 1317, rain ruined crops for seasons. It wasn't just cold, it was famine. Up to 30 million people affected. And when there's no food, people get imaginative. Cannibalism was whispered about. Infanticide too. Not dinner table conversation, but then again, we didn't always have dinner. But that's the thing about winter. It's not just about enduring the cold. It's about enduring each other. A family of 6, 3 goats, 2 chickens, and a bucket of salted fish sharing 20 square feet of living space? That's a social experiment with no exit. You hear every cough, every complaint, every unfortunate digestive development. Privacy becomes a myth. Modesty goes out with the sunlight. You do your best not to argue, not out of patience, but because it stirs up the air and lets in more cold. And so you settle in. You shrink your world down to a few feet around the fire. You learn the weight of every blanket, the creak of every board, the rhythm of the weather. Days shorten, nights lengthen, and time starts to dissolve into a sort of frozen soup. You're not living, exactly. You're enduring. And eventually, you stop asking how long winter will last. You just wake up each day and survive that one. If you're lucky, the firewood holds out. If you're very lucky, the roof does too. Because in a medieval winter, the cold doesn't knock. It lets itself in. And stays a while. And tomorrow it starts again. Winter doesn't just try to kill you with cold. It kills you with chores. And at the top of that frozen to-do list, wood. Endless amounts of it. You don't just need a few logs for ambience. You need firewood like your life depends on it, because it does. Everything revolves around fire. It cooks your food, warms your bones, dries your socks, scares off rats, and makes the house only mostly uninhabitable. Without it, you're not a peasant. You're a popsicle with taxes. But fire doesn't magically appear. It takes wood, lots of it. Cut, carried, chopped, stacked and cursed at. Gathering firewood is the medieval equivalent of having a second full-time job, except this one pays in back pain and frostbite. There's no chainsaw, no gas-powered anything. Just an axe that's been in the family so long you're not sure if it's a tool or an heirloom. The handle's cracked, the blade is blunt. But it's still better than using your hands, which, let's face it, you probably will anyway once the axe gets stuck in the 3rd log. You start in autumn, of course. Everyone says that. Start early. Except there's never enough time. The harvest runs late, your neighbour borrowed your axe, and you sprained your ankle trying to outrun an angry goose. So here you are in December, swinging steel at a tree like it insulted your mother, praying it falls in the right direction. And trees don't cooperate. They're heavy, unpredictable, and covered in snow. You cut one down, only to realise you still have to chop it, carry it, and stack it. Repeat 50 times. If you're lucky, your back just hurts. If you're not, the tree lands on you and you become a cautionary tale. Once the wood is chopped, it needs to dry. That takes months. So you burn it wet, which means it smokes, hisses, and barely burns at all. Congratulations. You've just turned your home into a tepid, smoky nightmare. Hope you weren't planning to breathe properly this winter. The rich, of course, have options. They hire people. They send servants into the woods while they sip wine in front of a roaring hearth. You are the servant, and your hearth is mostly a pile of wet twigs trying their best. Legally, you're not even allowed to gather wood in some places. Forests belong to lords. And if you're caught collecting kindling on noble land, the punishment ranges from fines to beatings to, occasionally, being made an example of. For picking up sticks. Yes, really. That's why many peasants turn to alternatives. things like peat, dried animal dung, or bundles of brush. These technically burn in the same way that technically soup counts as a meal. Peat gives off heat, but it also gives off a smell like wet ashes and regret. Dung burns surprisingly well, but let's not pretend anyone's happy about it. Still, you use what you have. You gather dried cow patties with frozen hands and pretend you're not inhaling memories of last summer's pasture. The good news? It's free. The bad news? Your cottage now smells like a campfire held inside a barn. Stacking firewood is an art. Too tight and it moulds. Too loose and it falls over and breaks your toe. So you build a neat pile against the wall of your house, wrap it with whatever canvas you can steal from your cousin, and hope it doesn't collapse under snow. It will. And you never have enough. That's the golden rule. Doesn't matter how much wood you cut. It's never enough. By February, you're down to burning fence posts, old furniture, or anything that vaguely resembles timber. There's no sentimentality. If it catches fire, it's fuel. You dream of firewood. You count logs instead of sheep. You have actual arguments over who burned the good stick too early. You ration embers. You hoard coals like they're treasure. And if you manage to find a particularly dry branch under the snow, you bring it home like a war trophy. Sleeping in winter is a gamble. If the fire dies out, the temperature inside drops to hope you wrote a will. You tuck in close, under layers of blankets, furs and other humans. Not because you like them, but because survival beats personal space. In some homes, livestock sleep inside too. Not out of kindness, out of necessity. Chickens provide eggs and ambient warmth. Pigs are radiators with hooves. Cows are basically space heaters that moo. It's not cosy. It's crowded, noisy, and smells like a petting zoo collapsed into a soup kitchen. But it's marginally better than freezing to death. Historically, peasants didn't just rely on personal effort. Communities often worked together to chop and haul wood. It was less about bonding and more about shared suffering. Everyone had blisters. Everyone was freezing. Everyone was equally miserable, which made it slightly easier to endure. In some regions, people used wood-saving tricks. Clay ovens were shared. Communal fires were maintained all day. You'd take turns baking bread in the village oven, all while pretending not to notice how warm Agnes's house always seemed to be. Suspiciously warm, in fact. Women and children gathered kindling, not because it was easier, but because that's just how the labour got divided. If you were small and had fingers, you were sent to the woods with a basket and told not to come back empty. What you returned with might have been twigs, might have been pine cones. Either way you contributed, and then there's chopping itself, a deeply medieval kind of misery. Your gloves, if you have them, are soaked through in minutes. Your fingers go numb, the axe slips, the wood splits wrong. Something hits your shin. You yell, not because it helps, but because that's all you've got left. By midwinter, the ground's too hard to chop into. Your hands have more splinters than skin, and you still haven't figured out where half your woodpile disappeared to. Spoiler, your neighbour borrowed it again, and yet you keep going, because fire is non-negotiable. It's warmth. It's food. It's the difference between making it to spring or becoming the reason your cottage smells even worse. When you sit by the fire at night, tired, sore, and lightly smoked, you feel something like peace. Not comfort, just the absence of immediate doom, which, in the Middle Ages, is as close as you're going to get. Of course, some winters are worse than others. You remember the bad ones by name. The winter of 43 when the roof collapsed, or the long freeze when the river turned to stone and everyone tried ice skating in wooden shoes. Some didn't make it. A few froze. A few just left and never came back. You stop asking questions after a while. The firewood dwindles. The wind whistles. You find yourself eyeing furniture a little differently. That stool you never liked suddenly looks flammable. Sentiment gives way to survival. If it burns, it's valuable. Eventually the fall comes. The snow retreats like a tired thief. The mud returns. Your boots vanish somewhere in it. But you made it. You survived another medieval winter without running out of wood, without freezing to death, and without strangling your cousin for stealing your best log. That's the victory. No medals, no parade, just frostbitten fingers, permanent smoke smell, and the deeply satisfying knowledge that you're not a popsicle. Not this year anyway. The next morning you do it all over again, because even as spring edges closer, the cold lingers. The chores never stop. And the fire, that fickle, flickering little god, always wants more. More wood, more sweat, more of you. And you give it. Because in the end, it's not about comfort. It's about survival, one splinter at a time. And tomorrow, same routine. Chop, stack, burn, freeze, repeat. You don't beat winter. You survive it. And if you're lucky, next year's axe won't break before your spirit does. Because in the end, winter doesn't care how tired you are. The logs won't chop themselves. The fire won't feed itself. And warmth, that rare, fleeting thing, has to be earned every single day. You don't need a calendar to know it's winter. Your stomach tells you first, loudly, repeatedly. It's not hunger in the modern sense. That gentle rumble that reminds you to check the fridge. It's deeper, angrier. The kind of emptiness that makes you stare at bark and wonder, could I stew that? Food in a medieval winter is like firewood. Always running out, never easy to get, and guaranteed to cause arguments. You don't plan meals. You ration them. You stretch them. You look at 3 shriveled turnips and call it a feast. You start with what you've stored. Grains mostly. Barley, rye, oats. Wheat if you're rich, or stealing from someone who is. You keep them in sacks, barrels, or anything that keeps out rats. Which is nothing. The rats always find a way. They're like furry tax collectors with teeth. Most of your meals revolve around pottage, the medieval mystery stew. It's not so much a recipe as a lifelong experiment. You throw in whatever's edible and hope it doesn't kill you. Root vegetables, dried beans, wilted greens, maybe a strip of dried pork if you've got royal connections or a generous neighbour. It simmers for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are just added to the pot. Old ones never quite leave. It tastes like boiled earth, with a hint of onion and regret. You eat it anyway, every day, twice a day if you're lucky, not because you like it, but because it's there. And in winter, that's enough. Meat is rare. You don't have a freezer. You don't even have a cold cellar, just a slightly less awful corner of the cottage. If you did slaughter something in the fall, a pig, a goat, your neighbour's least favourite chicken, you salt it, smoke it, dry it, and then hide it from everyone in the house, especially the kids. Kids will eat anything, including raw bacon and the string you tied it with. Sometimes you fish. If the river isn't frozen, if the ice isn't too thick, and if you haven't already burned your fishing rod for kindling. Ice fishing is a thing, just not a fun thing. You chip away at a hole in the ice while your toes slowly lose sensation. Then you sit, wait, and contemplate how life became a series of increasingly stupid decisions. If you're near the sea, you might dry some herring or smoke eel. It's nutritious. It's long-lasting. And it tastes exactly how it sounds. If you're not near water, you rely on whatever your neighbours didn't guard well enough. Bread is essential, but it's also a gamble. Made from whatever flour you've got, rye, barley, sometimes lentils, and often padded out with filler. Sawdust, yes. Grounder corns, maybe. Bark, on a bad year. Bread isn't soft and fluffy. It's a blunt object. Something between food and medieval defence weapon. And sometimes the bread fights back. In damp storage, rye can grow a fungus called ergot, a delightful little microbe that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and occasionally death. You don't know this. All you know is that the bread makes you see colours, scream at clouds, and possibly become a religious visionary, or a witch, depending on who's watching. Dairy helps. If you have animals that haven't frozen, wandered off, or been eaten. Milk spoils quickly, so you turn it into butter or cheese. The cheese is hard, salty, and vaguely threatening. Butter's a luxury. You keep it wrapped in cloth, hidden under your bed like it's gold. Because in winter, it basically is. Eggs? Not likely. Chickens slow down in the cold. They're too busy trying not to die. You might get 1 a week, maybe 2 if you speak nicely to the hens and threaten the rooster. That egg goes in the pottage, or you stare at it long enough to get full from imagination. Fresh fruits and vegetables? That's adorable. No apples, no greens. Maybe a dried plum from last August, if it didn't rot or become home to a worm. Most vitamin C comes from sour cabbage or fermented turnip, lovingly described as crunchy disappointment in vinegar. It keeps scurvy away, but also friends. Preservation is everything. You salt, smoke, pickle, and dry anything that once moved, grew, or was near something that did. You make jams from berries, if you managed to find them, and didn't eat them all in a sugar-starved frenzy last summer. You hang herbs from the ceiling, until they drop into the soup one by one like leafy confetti. Nothing is wasted. Bones are boiled twice. The fat is saved. Even the ashes from the fire end up in soap or used to scrub pots. If someone throws away food, you question their sanity. Or you marry them, because clearly they're wealthy enough to waste things. And then there's hunger itself. Not mild hunger. Not I skipped lunch hunger. But the kind that makes you feel your stomach rubbing against your spine. The kind that makes you chew slowly, not for flavour, but to make it last. Hunger's a full-time presence in winter. It sits with you, watches you cook, comments on your portions, judges your neighbour's squirrel stew, and says, actually, that looks all right. There's a rhythm to it. You wake up hungry. You go to bed still hungry. You learn to live with the gnawing feeling, like a mouse chewing inside your belly. Eventually, you stop noticing, until you smell stew from a neighbour's hut and immediately consider selling a sibling. Even the better off peasants don't eat well. They just eat slightly more of the same bland, mealy disappointment. Occasionally, someone manages a real treat. Honeycomb, fresh apple slices, a slice of salted beef the size of a coin. It's a celebration, not for the flavour, but for the reminder that life isn't always awful. And then come the lean years, the bad harvests, the crop failures. You remember the winter of 1316, or at least the stories. Heavy rains drowned the fields. Rot set in.